can't imagine a more timely topic. I love that it's happening here at the business school because I feel like that is probably the most important thread that needs to be woven through all the conversations around secure energy in the world, and what that means for the other humans around the world and their quality of life. And if we can't do that in a way that is economically viable business, we're going to have a really hard time finding solutions to move the needle on this critical issue. At the Ralph Lowe Energy Institute, I'm honored to be a part of what we are trying to do here at TCU to help move that needle. My name's Ann Blunster. I'm the executive director of the Institute and also a faculty member here at the Neely Business School in the management department. These are the folks in the room that we have the conversations around. Are we, Kaylin, are we having the right curriculum in front of our students to make sure that they are poised to be able to meet these challenges?
We have embarked on a global energy war that is unprecedented since the oil embargo of 1973 that Arab members of OPEC imposed on the West for its support of Israel in that war. So what has happened is that energy has become weaponized by Putin and his allies, and increasingly energy is being used for political ends, which are very punitive in order to punish Europe for sanctions that is imposed, and also United States on Russia for its brutal invasion of Ukraine, and in part also because Putin sees this as a way to get his version of the New World Order on the agenda of global politics. The cost of this year's environmentally induced damages in Florida, in Puerto Rico, in wildfires, California, and Oregon, and then flood in Kentucky. The latest economic figure that I saw by economists is $152 billion. And that is supposed to become more intense in future. The cost is going to go up. So the cost of inaction is going to supersede the cost of action.
In the U.S., our forms and sources and resources of energy are far different from those that exist in Central Europe, for instance. So it may mean something different from us, but at the core of that, I think it means a supply of abundant energy, a supply of affordable energy that no matter where you are in your economic condition and status, that you can afford to keep the lights on, keep your family fed, keep your family warm. And so we all agree that we want to end energy poverty. We all agree that we want cleaner sources that reduce both carbon dioxide as well as those other pollutants that we at the EPA and the state of Oklahoma and the state of Texas regulate, like nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide and ground level ozone and lead, mercury, toxins, things like that. So we all want that cleaner future, but we need to find out how we can make all of these systems work together. You know, in Oklahoma, we consider ourselves as the premier all of the above state, and really it's the more of everything state. You know, we have 50% renewable energy. We have 12 gigawatts of wind installed, not compared to the 29 of Texas, but we're 8 times smaller. So, you know, and then most of the rest of our gas, you know, most of the rest of our energy comes from natural gas. But we're also the most affordable state in the country. And what I think that illustrates, and by the way, we've reduced carbon dioxide at 2 times the national average. We hit the 50% benchmark in the power sector. That was originally a 2050 goal, a 2030 goal. We hit it in 2020. So we think we're one of the states that actually has a chance to decarbonize the power sector by 85% by 2030. We've leaned in all on renewable in Oklahoma, and we'll continue to do so because we got lots of wind and lots of sun and lots of land, and the ability to make that happen. But just a thought for our next panel is, you know, we all are talking about electrification, and we're all talking about wind and solar being the answer. But if you think about this complex energy system, electricity only makes up about 20 to 25% of our total energy demand. So even if we outfitted the entire country in renewables, which only put power on the grid. They're not for thermal heat processes and things like that. We're only affecting a quarter of our energy systems. And so now more than ever, to Manichair's point of depoliticizing this topic, we need to have real adult conversations about how we take innovation, technology to both clean up the upstream and downstream on our existing sources, as well as feathering in all of these great new alternative sources like hydrogen, like molten salt renewable. But these things, you know, if you look at the IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act, these are all technologies that are just near-term commercialization. They're nowhere near mature. And so we need to continue to invest in existing sources, let you guys as innovators and, you know, corporate employees and thought leaders lead in finding the way to make all of these systems work together in a much more affordable and abundant way.
The Biden administration has got its back against the wall in this area right now. They have very few degrees of freedom in which to operate because of a number of things out of their control. And I think that's to the point that our two previous speakers have made. The complexity, the density of issues that impinge upon policy decisions, especially in the energy arena, is something to behold. And you know, even after having worked for over 30 years, trying to understand these processes and their complexity, I'm kind of left thinking, well, any step that you take is always going to have a reaction, and it may not be the one that you're seeking. But we do know that the Russians have already been subjected to 2 rounds of sanctions because of their invasion. We expect that production will actually reduce significantly in the next year in Russia. And that's also to say that we are now witnessing Russia selling at a discounted price oil to China, oil to India. They're sending oil to Cuba, and I know they're not going to get any money by sending the oil to Cuba because Cuba doesn't have any money. And so it's going to further complicate the international relations dimension of what it is that we're talking about. I believe as we go forward, the development of this next generation of folks working in the camp of energy security, energy policy, is going to be drawn similarly with people with those diverse types of knowledge bases.
I can recall just this time last year, frankly, when we were having very, very pointed conversations with the German government about the energy security risks of single point dependency due to their completion of the Nord Stream 2 project. What we were told continually is the market will solve it. This is a business decision. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has turned that on its head completely, and I think it's reinforced the notion that energy security is fundamentally a policy decision. It's a policy decision in terms of the partners you work with, in terms of the energy sources and diversified inputs that you intake into your energy system domestically or internationally. And it all comes down, in my mind, and this is where I might stop and pass it along for the sake of time, because I think this is the fundamental problem, whether you're talking in the crisis of now or the way we think of energy security in the future. It comes down to the energy supply chain, right? The energy supply chain that exists in the hydrocarbon supply chain or in the renewable energy supply chain. Currently we're looking at a crisis related to the hydrocarbon supply chain, but as we look to an environment where we're pursuing additional renewable energy deployment, where we're looking to lead in areas such as industrial decarbonization, you're talking about supply chains for minerals, you're talking about supply chains and trade, and that is introducing new pressure points into our broader conversation around energy and climate security. So the State of the Union is not so hot right now, to say the least, but I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities, as with any crisis, to rethink how we conceptualize our own energy security and move forward to a more energy secure, reliable energy supply chain.
I started like 30 years ago when I was a teenager. We had a rolling blackout in Bulgaria. It was like 3 hours with and 3 hours with and 3 hours without electricity. And it was during the winter usually. So it were going together with dark and cold because at the moment you don't have electricity. We were out of the heating as well. So it continued for a couple of years. Later, of course, we managed. But what the situation today in Europe, in Kosovo, you know, probably in the last months they announced also rolling blackout. So they have really today in Kosovo blackout. It's 6 to 2, 6 hours with and 2 hours without electricity, and it's in the central Europe. It's less than 900 miles from Brussels, and it's there. It's a blackout. It's real, and the people suffer it. So what's the reason for that? I mean, Europe is consuming around 150 BC per year from the Gazprom, from Russian gas. And you can imagine then only 75 BC out of them could be imported in Europe through the free slots of the LNG terminal. And there probably you can speak a lot more about me, more than me about that. But in general, Europe cannot subtract at the moment the lack of Russian gas, which happened after the invasion. So there are not many other sources, and 40% of the electricity in Europe is coming after the cogeneration and producing it from natural gas. So it's very difficult to subtract it with something else. And Europe is facing a huge amount of infrastructure need for new construction. That's the moment Europe has to really invest, because even if in the US or Asia you can produce enough LNG for Europe, there is nothing to know where to place it and know how to use it. I mean, it could be there, you can find the ships and everything else, but we cannot upload it and we cannot use it. So this winter, I mean, historically in Europe for the last 2,000 years, the winter has been cold, and it's like, not like to change that the summer is not coming in December. So if the winter is pretty much the same, we are really looking for probably blackouts in Europe and some cold houses, which is, I don't know how to solve, but definitely the European Parliament and the people there have to hear more about such a summits and the people who are thinking in this direction in a pragmatic way. Thank you.
I had the great honor in February of last year being appointed chairman of the Energy Committee. Let me repeat that. In February of last year, I was appointed the chairman of the Energy Committee. A week later, we had Winter Storm Uri, and a week after Winter Storm Uri, we had a joint committee hearing with the State Affairs Committee, and they basically oversee electricity. And we had a 26-hour, almost continuous hearing on what went wrong, what went right, and what did we need to do legislatively last session to make policy changes in the state of Texas to make certain that what happened would never happen again, because people did lose their lives. And I'll leave you on this hook. When people ask me at the end of 26 hours of hearings what went wrong, basically two things went wrong. One, human error. And two, common sense. And one more thing I guess I should add is complete lack of communication.
We want to decarbonize the Florida Power and Light Company. By doing that, we're going to build somewhere in the neighborhood of 160,000 megawatts of solar and wind. Florida's blessed with a lot of solar. We're also cursed with a lot of clouds. So, I'm sorry, I said wind. Scratch that out. Solar and storage. When those clouds come over, we need to have some of that solar energy so that our grid stays stable. So we're going to decarbonize the Florida Power and Light Company. We're then going to take our learnings and decarbonize the rest of the energy industry in the United States. We believe that's a $2 trillion capital opportunity for all of us here. And that does not just include wind, solar, and storage. Ken mentioned before he left the stage hydrogen. We actually think hydrogen is much closer to commercial than some people believe, and certainly with the $3 a kilogram PTC that's in the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, that's going to help. That's a $2 trillion opportunity. And then the third thing is we're going to decarbonize the rest of the U.S. economy, which represents another $2 trillion opportunity. So the opportunities are immense. My philosophy is use what's in front of you the most efficiently as you can, and you get ready for what's coming. And so all these sources that we're talking about are part of the solution right now. We have to figure out, as a country and as a company, we're trying to get there first. What does the future look like?
You can't have effective energy transition without energy security. And we've learned this through our decades of experience, and I think, in a sense, Europe is learning that the hard way right now. References to replacing 100 150 BCM of Russian pipeline gas in about 9 months, that's a tall order if you think about it. One of our vessels, they're called floating storage and regasification units, have between 5 and 8 BCM per year of regasification capacity. And there are only about 48 of these vessels in the world. So we are deploying one of our vessels this winter to Finland and Estonia. They have a combined annual natural gas consumption of about 3 BCM. So one of our vessels will help both of those two countries break free from their dependence on Russian gas. And we're also working on deploying one of our vessels to Germany next year. Now, Germany has about 100 BCM of natural gas consumption. And so we're working together with our partners and with the German government to be able to figure out how do they displace Russian gas, and where they can't displace it, how can they use other sources or manage demand better in order to get through this winter and next winter.
The reality is LNG is a necessary part of the solution here, right? What we continue to argue is that as we continue to think through this nexus of energy security and the need to decarbonize, natural gas and LNG in particular is a necessary solution to make sure that you're enabling energy security while preventing, rampant growth of coal usage in the developing world. And I think that's the false choice that is continually being foisted into this debate right now as a result of what's going on in Europe. It's the conversation of, hey, we need this natural gas now, but we don't need it we don't want it. The reality is, as a baseload energy source, you're going to need that natural gas, and there's going to be some stickiness to that infrastructure over the long term. Sure, flexibility is needed. Sure, more supplies are needed to ensure that you can balance those supplies between Europe and the developing world. But none of that speaks to an idea that natural gas is not going to be a part of this energy transition for the foreseeable future, particularly when complemented with a number of decarbonization technologies like methane reduction, CCUS, hydrogen transferability, all of which are at play and very much in the policy conversation in Washington right now by virtue of the IRA and IIJA. So that's the high-level look. It's necessary, right? We need to think through it carefully in terms of its utility for certain geographic jurisdictions, right? But amidst all of that, we need to make sure we're utilizing gas as an important part of the decarbonization story using those enabling technologies such as hydrogen, CCUS, and methane reduction.
To look at the renewable energy and hydrogen as a potential solution of the problems in Europe, I would divide the answer into two different points: the long term and the short term. In the long term, definitely it will bring some storage for the power, and it can bring some engineering solutions and really work. But in the short term, when you're talking about this winter, next winter, and the winter after, it's much more complicated because, as per today, using hydrogen as a storage of energy is extremely expensive. And the other options like batteries, I mean, after 6,000 cycles, you have to throw them away, and no one wants to recycle them. And today we had a great idea of one of the MBA students about cryptocurrency to subtract and to keep the energy there. But all these things, they are a little bit in the future. So hydrogen, I would classify as a long-term solution, but not really a short to mid-term. Even a mid-term solution, it's not possible. And we are talking about importing LNG gas in Germany. When you guess how many LNG terminals Germany have, 0 today, so 0. So it's quite complicated, and really the next 3 winters are very challenging. I would say they're not challenge, they're issue. But so that's the answer for the hydrogen. I would see it like 5-10 years. It depends on the engineer and the money you put in R&D, and it could be 15 years. No one knows.
So we've already committed a few $100 million into a variety of different hydrogen plays. The least of which, or the last one, would be spinning a turbine to generate electricity with it. I mean, we're involved in mobility, trying to see, can we in fact create a hydrogen station system that would allow large haul trucks to move across the country. I mean, electric cars are great. I don't own one, but you can't put a battery big enough on a truck, move it across the country efficiently, and still have room to haul anything meaningful. So if we're going to actually decarbonize transportation, which is a lot bigger opportunity. Ken, I'm looking at you because you mentioned the size that electric generation has as far as carbonization. The transportation industry is either going to figure out how to use hydrogen efficiently or it's never going to fly. And, you know, again, I mentioned there's a $3 per kilogram production tax credit in the recently passed IRA that allows that to actually get closer to par. The next thing, because we have a lot of wind turbines and they're all in rural areas, there's a lot of ammonia and fertilizer that's generated in those areas, and there's a huge amount of interest in taking some of our wind energy, which oftentimes gets generated when the power price is low, demand is low, whatever, and diverting that to create fertilizer. That is not an economic opportunity yet, but I think it's going to be. And so we've been looking at other things, blending hydrogen in existing pipeline. There's a physical limit to that based on the corrosiveness of hydrogen versus natural gas. We're invested and interested in all of it because Oklahoma can get to 85% reduction in its carbon by 2030. To get to 100, hydrogen's got to play a factor.
So we have 2 nuclear plants in the state of Texas. I'm all for there being more, but frankly, we have an administration up in Washington, D.C., no offense, who is against it, who will say no to it. We have a Secretary of Energy, a United States Secretary of Energy, who bashes the oil and gas industry like I've never seen before in the history of the United States. It's unfathomable to me. And she wants, you know, everybody to get on solar and sun and wind tomorrow. Well, solar and wind are they're valuable and they're necessary in the state of Texas. We don't bash solar or wind, but they on our grid on a hot day in Texas where we need close to 80,000 megawatts. So on the very best day, wind and solar can only provide. Solar gets up to close at 10,000 megawatts. Wind, if it's blowing really well, then we can get to 40,000. So we still need 40,000 megawatts on a hot day. Where's that coming from? It's coming from coal, it's coming from natural gas, and it's coming from nuclear. The problem with Winter Storm Uri, it was a perfect storm. Everything wasn't working as well as it should have been. There was no wind, so we had no wind. There was no sun, there was no solar power. The coal actually froze. Literally, coal froze. You can't burn freezing coal. To our 2 nuclear plants, one of them wasn't working 100% capacity because of maintenance. So, and then natural gas, we stupidly turned the power off in West Texas, so we couldn't pump the natural gas.
Europe were fighting to understand whether the nuclear power plants they're blue or dark or black or brown or whatever. Then overnight they decided they are blue now or green because they need it. So for the last 15 years it was extremely difficult to find a solution and to get a permit for a nuclear power plant in Europe just because they were not politically correct and no one likes them in the European Parliament. But today's different picture. The problem is that to build one you need 5 to 7 years at least, even with the new small reactors. So it's been a kind of a PR issue for the last 15 to 20 years in Europe, and now we have the flowers on it.
Nuclear has to be a part of the picture of the baseload mix moving forward. The challenge is how do you actually accelerate the process of of traditional nuclear energy while also stimulating accelerated new nuclear, right? Small modular reactors, et cetera. You look at traditional nuclear assets in the United States up and down the East Coast, right? Those have been beguiled by cost overruns, construction delays, et cetera, all amidst a time where they're trying to compete for gigawatt hours with with things like solar. That all makes it hard. At least in certain circles in Washington, you tend to the conversation around nuclear's viability, right, from a market perspective, comes back a little bit to discussion around carbon price, right? Is by putting a price on carbon, you actually make nuclear suddenly much more viable in terms of the power output and power generation output. The landscape for nuclear in particular is one to be optimistic, right, given the innovation cycle that's about to emerge. But in general, I think there are still social headwinds for nuclear in some cases, right, that are going to be difficult to get around.
Well, I'll say this and take it back to the storm. People are like, oh, there was price fixing during the storm. No, there wasn't. It's the marketplace. When there's high demand, the prices go up. when there's low supply, prices go up. That's what happened. That's what happened with natural gas prices during the storm. The wind doesn't always blow, and the sun doesn't always shine. So then we're extremely dependent on coal, nuclear, and natural gas. And when the Biden administration, I think the other day, said, oh, the oil companies, they need to lessen the price of oil. It's a commodity. I just don't understand how the federal government can demand oil companies to set a price, just like we don't set the price of natural gas.
The ERCOT market, you only get paid for the energy you deliver. If you go north in SPP, you get paid to have the capacity to deliver that energy, and then you get paid something when you deliver it. There hasn't been enough time between the passage of IRA and seeing the impact of IRA, but certainly with, as I said earlier, with a standalone storage credit, you should see more storage not only in ERCOT but other places, and probably coupled with wind. But you have to remember that's going to add to the cost of energy, because you're going to put something in there, going to take it out, and then there's going to be less of it, and also just the capital cost that someone has to recover. So the question for ERCOT, you all, is how much are you willing to pay for that insurance policy? And it's a pretty important insurance policy, because it's going up. It's not going to reduce anything. And then what's the market mechanism to recover? Putting a storage asset does not generate anything. It sometimes is a load, and it sometimes is dispatching, so it looks like a source. But the market's still it's got to form around that.
A couple of cautionary tales from what we've seen it accelerate. In Brazil, where hydro makes up more than 50% of power generation, Brazil experienced its worst droughts in 90 years last year. And so you actually saw LNG cargoes being diverted from Europe and Asia to Brazil. And it was because Accelerate and others were operating LNG terminals that gave Brazil that flexibility to be able to use different sources when sort of what they had been depending on was not reliable. And when the rains came back, they didn't come back in the right areas. So they still needed to import gas. Pipeline from Bolivia, who's become an unreliable supplier similar to Russia. But again, thinking about the market and where they need to get security of supply and energy security, it's been LNG. And then one little vignette from Europe. Albania is a country that is about 99% dependent on hydro. And the Albanian energy minister came to Houston and met with Accelerate, ExxonMobil, and a few other energy companies and said, we need LNG because when we deal with droughts, we don't have power, or we're dependent on our neighbors who are basically sending us coal-based electricity, expensive to import, and we need something that is flexible, that's reliable, and that will give us the ability to be an energy hub regionally in Southern Europe. So I just wanted to say, I think that some of the goals around net zero and being able to decarbonize are very admirable. But one of the things that I said earlier is you cannot get to energy transition unless you've figured out your system and you have energy security.
If we don't find the economic solution that is viable, it's going to be really hard to do the things we need to do with the unique circumstances of the places that you just mentioned, where there isn't a balanced energy landscape, and how dangerous that can be, and continues to reiterate the fact of what I think we really hone in on here at the Ralph Lowe Energy Institute, which is we need more of everything, and we can do it better in a more efficient way, in a cleaner way, but we're going to need more of everything, and we're going to have to come up with the next greatest thing that isn't even here yet, that we don't even know about. That happens with young minds and students in classrooms getting excited about being a part of this industry. It happens when we have people like you who take time out of their day and get here and fly here and stay here from all over the world to just share a few brief moments on what they're thinking and what they're facing and how their companies are managing these challenges. Critical combination of that, I think, is what will lead us forward. I love the mix of the diversity of the age group in this room right now as I'm looking around. That's the answers. It's the folks with experience and that have been through these cycles that can share that with the younger people and the bright young minds that can help really lead these companies to figure out how to best allocate their resources so that their companies can be profitable, but also help make the world a more secure place. And I think we all aren't here if we didn't think that wasn't through our industry, which is energy. It affects everything. It shapes our daily lives.